Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining the Second Mile Fellowship. We are in Genesis chapter 25 and 26 today, just continuing right along. And I have chapter 25 divided into 5 sections. The first 6 verses, I have that titled Abraham's Descendants with Keturah. This was a wife that he had taken after the death of Sarah, and it lists out the descendants there. And then you see the same principle being applied to the children of Keturah as was Hagar, and that was Isaac is who the promise is to, and so therefore he separated out and gave unto the concubine's gift, but his inheritance, everything was given unto Isaac. Verses 7 through 11, I have that titled The Death of Abraham, and it's interesting. What do you see? You see in verse number 9 that Isaac and Ishmael get back together to bury their father, and we see where he's buried there at the cave of Machpelah, which is where his wife is buried. And then verses 12 through 18 lists Ishmael's sons, and not a whole lot there, just tells of his life. He lived 137 years, and they dwelt, and it gives the area in which they dwelt, which is the southern part of the land there beneath Canaan's land. Verses 19 through 28, now we're getting into a new narration, and that is Jacob and Esau. And one of the great verses in the life of Isaac is found in verse number 21. We see, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, the way I mark my Bible, you see that you see 3 cause and effect things going on here. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife. You see this intercessory prayer, which surely he learned from his daddy, because she was barren. So because she was barren, he prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord was entreated of him. The Lord hearkened his ear unto the prayer of Isaac. And because Isaac prayed, and then the Lord heard, now the Lord is responding and opening her womb, and gave 2 children. And she was having trouble within the pregnancy, and she asked of the Lord. And that's good that she asked of the Lord. So we see Abraham's descendants calling and inquiring of God. And God explains that there's 2 different nations coming forth from her. And we'll see this Jacob and Esau. And explains why she's having the troubles, the struggles between these 2 peoples would carry on for many years to come, and began even in the womb. And I wrote this down as I was reading this earlier, and I wanted to make sure and stated how I wrote it down. That was, great prayer to a great God brings great results, and that's a very true saying. And then we see, of course, God's prophecy. I'd already mentioned that in verse number 23. And then also you see favoritism displayed. They're very different when they came out. Esau was red and hairy, and Jacob was smooth. Esau was a man of the field. Jacob dwelled in tents. Very different people, very different interests, very different mindsets, and very different desires within them, as we'll see proves forth in the next portion, and that is verses 29 through 34, the remainder of the chapter. I have that titled A Birthright Dispised. So this is one of those famous stories where Jacob is in there and he's cooking. Esau comes in from the field, and he's just, you see this big drama act going on. Oh, he's about to die. He's going to faint, and from this hunger, and Jacob takes this opportunity, and he says, yeah, I've got these good lentils and pottage boards over here. I can give you some. It's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you your birthright. And see, the birthright in the Jewish culture was the firstborn, which was Esau, because he came forth. They were twins, but he came forth first, so therefore he was the grantor of the recipient of the rights of the firstborn. The firstborn would become head of the household upon the death of the patriarch, and they would get a double portion of the inheritance. So if you had two sons, then the portion of the inheritance would be divided into 3. 2 of them would go to the firstborn, one would go to the other. And it says here Edom. It mentions that name in what is that? verse number 30. Esau said unto Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with the same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. Edom means red, and this is an indication that Esau's descendants would be called the Edomites. Okay, and so that's it for Genesis chapter 25. We move forward. Esau does for a pot of porridge, he sold his birthright, and that's just really an illustration of how powerful the flesh is and how destructive the flesh can be. Moving on to chapter 26, I have this divided into three sections, verses 1 through 11. I have that titled, Isaac Dwells with the Philistines. And at the first part of this, you see that in blue. Verses 2 through 5 is the Lord speaking, and he's essentially reassuring Isaac of the same promises he had made unto his daddy Abraham. And it's because of Abraham. That's so important to notice too. God just showed me that. Verse number 5, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. God was going to bless Isaac, not because God was blessing Isaac, but he was blessing Isaac because Abraham was faithful. That should teach us parents that if we're faithful, God will bless our children, not necessarily because of them, but because of us being faithful unto his charge, his commandments, his statutes, and his laws. And then we also see something like father, like son. He goes into Gerar, which is Philistia. That's where the land of the Philistines. And what does he say in verse number 7? It says, and men of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, she's my sister, for he feared to say she's my wife. Where did he learn that from? You see, the children learn the good and the bad from the parents. So he entreated his God. He looked unto the Lord to heal the barrenness of his wife. And I mean, he understood that he was a product of prayer, and he was a product of promise, and he was a product that came forth in a great way by a great God. And so what did he do? He called upon the God, same God that his father called upon, but now he's also committing the same sin that his daddy committed as well. We need to be very careful about how we act in front of our children, because they will mimic what we do, good and bad. Except this time it's worse. Abraham, it was a half-truth with him. It's an outright lie with Isaac, and that's kind of the way it works. If we are here spiritually, typically our children will be here spiritually. They'll be slightly less and slightly less and slightly less. It's not often that it goes the opposite way, but it does. It's just not often. It's the exception, not the rule. Verse 12 through 33, I have that titled, The Wealth and Wells of Isaac. In this passage of Scripture has a wonderful passage that tells the story of Isaac digging the wells of his father. And one of the best verses in Isaac's life, I mentioned one, this is another, and it's verse number 18. And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father. For the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. So in this verse, we're seeing several things. Number one, the wells of his father were good wells. They were productive wells, but the enemy came in and stopped them up. And so Isaac determined in his heart he was going to redig the wells. He didn't need new ones. He just needed to go back and dig the ones in which his daddy had already done. And see, we in America, we don't need a new thing to well water the land today. We just need to go back to what our forefathers had previously dug that the enemy has covered in, and we need to redig those wells. And I like that the latter part of this verse, and he called their names by the names by which his father had called them. He had such respect for his father, and he wasn't trying to make a name for himself. The names in which his daddy gave him were good enough, and so therefore he just called him the same names in which his daddy called him. We see the covenant in verses 26 through 33, and also God's blessings upon him, and that's found. We see that the Philistines had kicked Isaac out of the land, and now they see Isaac is becoming great, and they come unto him, and they're wanting to make a treaty, because they're afraid at this point that their jealousy is now turning into fear, and they don't want Isaac as an enemy. And Isaac is pretty hurt about this, and he said there in verse number, 27, and Isaac said unto them, wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? He's like, man, you hate me. Why are you coming to me now? So he's pretty hurt about this, but instead of returning evil for evil, he was a blessing unto those that were evil to him. He made him a feast. He made the covenant with them. And then we see God blessing that action, that selfless action in verse 32. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came, said that, man, they digged a well and they found water. So God does bless those that are upright in heart and keep his commandments. Verses 34 through 35. Lastly, and that's Esau marries. And unequally, he marries the heathen women of the land, not just one, but two. Verse number 35, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. This was a grief unto his parents that he was yoked up with somebody he had no business being yoked up to. So that is Genesis 25 and 26. Hope this has been a help to you, and Lord willing, we will see you tomorrow.